Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this Fox Lane Quieter Neighbourhood webinar, which is part of our ongoing process of engagement and consultation. I hope you're all well. I'm Ian Barnes, I'm Deputy Leader of the Council, and LTNs and school streets fall under my climate change portfolio. The slide you can see on your screen informs you of the webinar's intentions, and I'm shortly going to hand over to Richard Eason, the Healthy Streets Programme Director, to talk you through the agenda and introduce you to the team. But firstly, I just thought I would take a few minutes to summarise the scheme so far, where we are, why we've done this. So this low traffic neighbourhood follows on from an unsuccessful trial in 2018, which left the door open for a more robust trial under the Quieter Neighbourhoods umbrella. Our first exhibition of a design was on 12th of November 2019. That was a good couple of months before we'd even heard about COVID. Our initial design wasn't received that well, so we came up with a brand new design in line with the engagement feedback, and that's what we trialled. The low traffic neighbourhood has been funded by TfL, unlike the Bowes LTM, which has been paid for solely by the government following its commitments in the Conservative manifesto and their 10-point plan for a green revolution to build low traffic neighbourhoods across the entire country. So what is the LTM? Put simply, we've installed filters in the form of bollards, planters or a camera so that only pedestrians, cyclists and emergency services can pass through the particular kind of filter that we're talking about. We haven't closed any roads. We haven't created gated communities or private estates. You can reach every house in the LTN area by vehicle whenever you wish. You can even park on those roads if you want for as long as you want, as long as there's not a CPZ. What you can't do is rat run across the LTN area. So these rat runners, which are displaced from main roads, have now been sent back to those main roads that were built for the volume of for a certain volume of traffic. I mean, our residential neighbourhoods aren't pressure valves because there are simply way too many cars on our roads. The minor roads have more blind bends, more pedestrians, less signalised junctions and less crossings, meaning a driver on a residential street is twice as likely to kill a child walking and 3 times more likely to kill a child on a bike than if they'd stuck to a main road in the first place. But we mustn't forget those residents on main roads, and we need to push heavily for road user charging, green barriers, cycle lanes, and I think we'll probably cover this more later in the Q&A. And just to emphasise, we are not trying to ban cars. We are asking those of you who are able-bodied to help us decrease those 35% of all journeys that are under 2 kilometres, which is about a 20-minute walk. And almost a third of journeys are for leisure. So instead of driving to the gym or driving your dog to the park, perhaps walk or cycle, car share, consolidate your trips, drive at non-peak hours, or just maybe not take the journey at all. LTNs are not new. There's a historic one just outside our current LTN area on Lee Hunt Drive, which uses a gate as a filter, and that's at the exit to the Bourne. There's another example at the end of Bush Hill. So why are we doing this? Well, air pollution causes 9,500 premature deaths in London every year. And the British Heart Foundation has found that living in some parts of London is now the equivalent of smoking 150 cigarettes a year. I don't want Enfield to join that group of boroughs. There's been a large increase in asthma deaths in the southeast, and London has seen a 17% increase from 2017 to 18, and 99% of London is exposed to particle pollution levels above the World Health Organization's recommended limits. When it comes to climate change, 39% of Enfield's greenhouse gas emissions are from our roads. It's the largest portion of our emissions, and Enfield has one of the highest mileages in London, which is even more alarming because 42% of the borough doesn't own a car. And we have a target to be a carbon neutral borough by 2040. So we really need to take action with regards to these greenhouse emissions, this 39% from our roads. When we consider residents with disabilities, they make 32% fewer car trips each day than other Londoners. Yet as pedestrians, people with disabilities are 5 times more likely to be injured by a motor vehicle than non-disabled people. And obesity. Only 17% of our children are now doing the hours daily exercise needed for a healthy lifestyle. 34% of 11-year-olds are now overweight or obese. Enfield has a high rate of childhood obesity. And childhood obesity can lead on to risk of heart disease, strokes, diabetes, breast cancers, and osteoarthritis. We've seen some really promising figures coming out of St Monica School, which is in the Fox Lane LTN. It has a school street, and there is the connection to the cycle lanes. And walking and cycling are both significantly on the increase in that school, which is amazing to see. And this is what we hope for all low traffic neighbourhood trials across the borough. So that's the where, why and how. And now I'm going to hand you over to Richard Eason.
Thanks very much, Councillor Barnes. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to outline the agenda for the evening. As you can see, and I've just heard, Councillor Barnes has done a welcome and set some context for the project. I'm just going to go through the agenda here and then move on to some housekeeping. After that, we're going to go through a series of project updates, which will include an overview explaining more about the rationale for the project. We're going to look at monitoring and evaluation and how we're approaching that. And I know there's a lot of interest in that area, and understandably so. We're going to go through the communications and engagement that's happened so far and that is currently ongoing. And also we'll be looking at the equalities approach as well. So I've got a number of colleagues from the team who'll be presenting, and they'll be introducing themselves at the start of their session. Once we've gone through those presentations, I'll come back to me and we'll touch on next steps, and then we'll go into a question and answer session. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time to be able to respond to your questions. So if we can go to the next slide, and I'd just like to touch on some housekeeping and a little bit about how we're going to manage the answers and the questions as well. So you should be able to see that you've got a question and answer function, and I think I can see some things coming through there already. So we will be looking to answer questions following the presentation, and we will. But there's a good chance that we're not going to get to all the questions, and we will be publishing the questions that you post, and then we'll do our best to manage the time to get through as many questions as possible. But if we can't get through them all, and I suspect we won't be able to, then we will follow up and respond to them in written form after the webinar. We're not going to be publishing comments, so it's absolutely fine to set out your comments and make your points. Do post those, and we'll be collecting those and we will be reviewing those, and it's always helpful for us to review that. But because there's quite a lot of people on the webinar, and to be able to manage the chat and to work through and understand what the questions are, it's important that we try and keep that as manageable as possible. We can post all the comments that we've had. We could publish those on the project page as well. So we're not trying to hide the comments, we're just trying to manage the evening session. So if you've got a question and a comment, separate them out. And if you've got multiple questions, and then I'd encourage you to make those as separate posts. And again, it just makes it more manageable for us on this end. I think everybody is clear that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be publishing the recording subsequently. So for people who've not been able to get here or want to look back on it. And the survey, as we'll touch on throughout the webinar, the consultation is currently running, and the project page is live, and that's the link to the project page. So hopefully that sets out the agenda and a little bit about how we're going to manage the session. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to just first of all provide a bit of background. I won't dwell on this, and Councillor Barnes has done that already. But this project has not come out of the blue. Residents have been raising concerns about traffic issues in the area for many years, and as part of what was previously the Cycle Enfield programme, conversations were started with the community, I think as early as back as 2014, but decisions were made at the time to pause those whilst the team focused on a number of other projects, namely some of the key cycling infrastructure projects on some of the primary roads. But that conversation was sort of restarted a few years later, and we did have this trial where we placed planters at the junctions of roads, and essentially, again, an experiment to see whether, if making it more harder effectively to travel through the area would be sufficient to discourage people from cutting through the area if they were just going straight through the area to get from to somewhere else rather than actually living within the area. And I think we collected data before we implemented that trial, and we collected data during it, and that suggested to us that those interventions were not having any impact on reducing the volume of traffic, and in some cases, and certainly anecdotally, we're actually resulting to traffic actually travelling faster in some instances, a certain sense of frustration at the delay that the planters were causing, and then a sort of desire to speed up between them to recover that lost time. So that was a trial that we said that we'd do, and we collect data before and we collect data afterwards, and we deemed it not to be working, and we removed the trial. We did say at the time that when we tried that we would try something else in the future if that didn't work. Councillor Barnes has mentioned the public event that we had back in the end of 2019, and then several weeks of opportunity for people to provide their feedback, which then moved us into a period of redesign and rethinking in light of the feedback received. And then in June we published a report which was setting out the rationale and the decision to start with a revised trial and a revised design, which started to be implemented in September. And consultation kicked off a few weeks later once that the implementation was significantly complete, and that is ongoing. So there's a little bit of background. If we move to the next slide. So we're going to talk through with you this evening. These are documents are uploaded to the project page, 4 areas. So I'm going to cover the project's rationale. Why are we doing this? We're going to look at equalities. We're going to look at monitoring, and we're going to look at communications and engagement plan. So we're giving you a summary, if you like, of these documents, but these are all in more detail available on the web page, or will be uploaded shortly. So you'll be able to go through and read those documents in more detail. Next slide, please. So that's where they are on the project page. So if you go to there, there's this document library on the right hand side, and then links through to a series of PDFs. Next slide, please. So to move on to the project rationale, next slide. So I think Councillor Barnes has already set out some of this and the rationale for really wanting to bring forward some form of change, and the Healthy Streets programme, and I'll touch on this in a little while, covers a range of initiatives, but it is looking at longer term behaviour change, trying to enable people to make alternative choices about how they travel short journeys, and the fact that transportation is is contributing so significantly to the borough's emissions in the context of a climate emergency. I think that the do nothing is not an option. So we need to move forward, and we want some change, and then we have to work out the challenge of exactly how we do that and what we do, and that's where it can often get difficult. Next slide, please. So again, we're not operating in a vacuum here at Enfield Council, so all the work that we're doing is aligned with the Mayor's transport strategy, which has been around now for a couple of years, but also more recently, and since the pandemic struck, the government have also published their gear change document. And so that document, the DFT and the Mayor are aligned in their views about the types of interventions that local authorities should be considering in order to enable that change. And as I've touched on, that's all within the context of a climate emergency, and now as well, of course, in the context of concerns about a car-led recovery and the impact that might have, in a post-COVID world. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to show this graph. This graph is taking data from Enfield, so it's annual motor vehicle traffic in Enfield. And the top line is all motor vehicles, the black line and the bottom line is just looking at cars and taxis. But what it illustrates is that over the last 10 years, we've seen this steady increase in the amount of vehicle miles that have been driven in the borough. The scale on the left-hand side is in millions, and so what that effectively equates to is in the last 10 years or so, Enfield, the amount of miles that have been driven on Enfield's roads has increased by over 300 million miles. Really significant increases, and a concern for a range of reasons. If we go to the next slide, this slide is then showing the types of roads that have effectively seen and coped with that overall increase in motor traffic. Now, this slide is showing London as a whole. So the top line, the green line, is showing the amount of traffic that A roads have been carrying, and that's the highest volume. Here we're in billions on the left-hand scale. So around about 11 billion miles per year, quite steady traffic on A roads. But what's interesting to see, and also fairly steady, much lower, under 2 billion, is on motorways and B roads. But I think what you can see, and what this graph clearly illustrates, is that the increase in traffic volume that we've seen over the last number of years, it's the minor roads that have taken the brunt of that effectively. So what we're seeing is this, and if you look around about 2008, that's around about sort of 5 and a bit billion journeys on those smaller roads, and then it's steadily increasing. So by the time you get to 2014, you're more like sort of 5 or 6 billion. By the time you get to 2016, more like 7 and a bit billion. And as you get towards the end of the graph there, we're creeping up to 9 billion. So this is a concern, and this is one of the things. This growth in motor traffic is a challenge for London, setting aside issues of obesity or climate change or inactivity and all those things. Just simply how the city will function from a capacity point of view. If nothing else, then it's a concern. And so there's a real case for change here, I would suggest, for bringing forward initiatives that help people to start to move around in different ways. So if we move to the next slide, this is just some captions, if you like, from the Mayor's transport strategy. So what this says is it's estimated that almost 5 million journeys per day could be walked or cycled are currently made by car. So it's some of those journeys that we want to try to eat into. But Londoners need quiet, safe, accessible streets that are not dominated by motor traffic and that are pleasant for walking, cycling and spending time. Making walking and cycling more appealing to Londoners requires a big change to take place in the city's culture. So it's the change that's the hard bit. So to address the problems that we've set out, we need to be able to enable people to alter some of their habits, if you like, in terms of how they move around. Now, that's not saying that. What we're saying is that everybody has got to walk and cycle for every journey. But what we are saying is that we need to enable more choices so that for some of people's journeys, where it's practical, particularly those shorter ones, they can start to use alternative methods of transport. So it's about enabling people to make different choices about how they might travel a particular journey, depending on the nature of the journey. So, I have a car, I have, a number of young children, and sometimes the car is the right choice, the practical choice, the choice that I need to make some journeys. But other times we can all go on the bus and we do, or we can walk, or we can cycle together. So it depends on the nature of the journey. So this is not about being anti-car, but it's about making the alternatives, including public transport, a much more natural choice. So if we go to the next slide, this just shows, this has got a little bit of So if you look at this is showing the different town centres and how far you can get within, for this one it's walking within 5, 10 or 15 minutes. So the point being, I think, that if you take Palmer's Green, for example, as a relevant local area, there's a reasonable geographical distance where people can walk around and cover quite a large area in a relatively short space of time. And and not everybody, I appreciate, can walk, but many can, and this is a way that we can all incorporate a little bit more physical activity into our daily lives. And I certainly, and maybe others have seen much more walking during COVID times, obviously with the suppression of capacity on public transport. And hopefully that will be something that will endure as people, and myself included, for some journeys, realise actually it doesn't take me that long to walk it, and I've sort of continued to do that. The next slide is a very similar map, but it's just showing those distances for cycling in 5 and 10 minute increments. And again, I think this really demonstrates how you can start to cover a much more geographical area on a bicycle versus walking in a similar amount of time. So again, not relevant or practical for everybody, certainly not for everybody for every journey. But actually, for a number of journeys with the right conditions, perhaps this can become a realistic choice. And I think that's the important thing, in that this is not just about how long it takes to get from A to B, but is the environment conducive enough to allow somebody to make that choice to travel in a more sustainable way and travel in a more active way. And at the moment, in many of our environments, the answer to that is no. A broad demographic of people don't feel comfortable in making that choice, and that's where we need to bring about some change to open up that opportunity to more people. So if we look at the next slide, this just sets out, and I don't intend to go through all these points, but the point that I'm making is that to generate that change, and it's a longer term generational change, we need to bring forward a whole series of interventions. We need this comprehensive approach to enable the change to take place. There's no one thing that is going to enable that change. It's a whole series of things working together. And from a Healthy Streets programme, these are some of the things and some of the initiatives that we're working on. The Quieter Neighbourhood programme that we're here discussing tonight is one of those things, and they all need to come together. And there's some of those things we need to do more of, and we need to get better at. But all of those things need to come together if we're going to get that change. Next slide, please. So by bringing forward those activities, those initiatives, and delivering those on the ground, which often means changing the way the design and the layout of some of our streets, we can start to enable some of these what we call healthy streets indicators. So this is part of the Mayor's transport strategy, and these are some of the things that we'd look to see. For a street to be classed as a healthy street, for it to have a number of these factors, and we'll be measuring our projects and scoring them, if you like, based on these indicators, and these are set out in the Mayor's transport strategy. Next slide, please. So the project objectives are as follows. So creating healthy streets, as I've just set out in line with the Healthy Streets indicators, to significantly reduce the volume of through motor traffic on the minor roads within the project area, and to enable a longer term increase in the levels of walking and cycling within and through the scheme area. Next slide, please. I've already said sort of briefly that this is not necessarily an easy thing to do, and there are a number of challenges and a number of issues that we need to continue to focus on. Here are just some of them, and we'll touch on these both in the rest of the presentation and in the Q&A. But enabling emergency services access has been a key concern, and we can talk about that more later. And we've enabled that through the use of camera enforced closures. We need to, as a team and as a council, continue to develop how we communicate, particularly in this COVID context that it's been challenging for everybody, and there's always things that we can do better, and we're interested to listen and learn about that. Of course, issues of equality fundamental to be considered, and how these schemes impact different groups, and that's something that we're spending significant time working on. And also the monitoring of projects. Now, I think there's been a lot of questions about the monitoring, and perhaps previously we've not set out as clearly as we could have done how we're going to do that. We're doing that now, but the monitoring of the impact of these projects is also further challenged by COVID and the impact that that's had on normal transport patterns. So that is an undeniable challenge for us, and we need to sort of navigate through that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Next slide, please. So that, I think, links us through to the monitoring and evaluation plan. So I'll now hand across to Christina, who will talk you through that.
Hi everyone, my name's Christina Gordon. I'm the project manager for the Fox Lane project. So we can just move on to the next slide, please. So this slide sets out each of the various areas that we are monitoring, and there are details of each of these in the monitoring plan, which is uploaded on our website on the Let's Talk page, which you can see a link to at the bottom of the slide here. Now, unfortunately, due to time, we haven't got. I won't be able to cover each of these off in detail, but if you have got questions about them, do feel free to use the Q&A function. So yeah, we can address them if I'm not able to get to them in these following slides. It's important to note that we haven't got any particular set targets for each of these areas that we are trying to reach in order for the project to be deemed a success or not. When it comes to making a decision on the project and evaluating the project, we will be looking at each of these, at the outcomes of each of these monitoring areas and the data behind them, and then a decision will be made against with the monitoring alongside the residents' views, stakeholder views, and also the policy setting and strategic context that Richard set out earlier. So we can move on to the next slide, please. In terms of traffic monitoring, the primary means of monitoring this is via automatic traffic counts. These are tubes placed across the road, and they're in place for a continuous period of time, usually 7 days. And they capture quite a lot of information, which is all really useful. So not only does it count the numbers of vehicles, but it also provides us with a breakdown of the types of vehicles, from lorries to cyclists and cars, and the different size of lorries as well, and it also captures vehicle speeds. Now, during the earlier development phases of the project, which have been talked about earlier, there were a number of traffic counts that we took back in initially 2018. So back in 2018, that we took counts on all the roads within the immediate Fox Lane area, so all the minor roads inside the boundary roads. And in 2019, we repeated those counts, which is a full another set. But we also took counts on a number of the primary roads around the area as well. And so these traffic counts are continuous, as I mentioned. They capture data throughout all day and night. So next slide, please. So this slide shows those traffic count locations. Each of the green icons are ones where we had that data collection from back in 2019. And you can see a number from inside the area, but also on some of the boundary and surrounding roads as well. And most of them are some of the primary roads. The cyan sort of blue colour, which is noted as a type 2, now that's the same type of data collection, but they're ones that we have, in response to feedback received, we've actually added them to our monitoring plan during the course of the trial. The purple locations are noted as turn-in count locations. We took some data back in 2019 at each of those junctions, and that just helps us inform. So we had a look at all the turning movements, how many cars are sort of making each turn at each of those junctions, and that just helps inform us how the area is being used by vehicles. So each of these sites has a count for cyclists as well, and in terms of pedestrians, we have a permanent site on the corner of Alderman's Hill and Green Lanes, down by that bottom purple icon, and that captures pedestrian movements, which gives an indication of the pedestrian movements in the area. Next slide, please. So now, obviously, there are a number of bus routes in the Fox Lane area, and you can see all of these on this slide. And naturally, they're all focused on the primary routes. And of course, if we will see any impacts on journey times in buses, because of course, in these places, they are generally mixed in with the general traffic. So Transport for London monitor the bus journey times quite closely, and that's done on a continuous basis via data capture on board the buses. So this gives us really good information on what the journey times, on how the journey times are occurring throughout the process of the trial, and we are coordinating with Transport for London to monitor that. And all of this information will be included in our reporting in the output of the monitoring. Next slide, please. So I'll talk on air quality for the next couple of slides. So when it comes to air quality, the primary pollutants of concern that we focus on are nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. And we focus on these. Enfield has some areas that have historically exceeded these objectives, which are set by the government at various times. And these exceedances have occurred at busy roadside locations. So nitrogen dioxide is a gas, and it forms as a result of road traffic and other fossil fuels being burned. And the presence of nitrogen dioxide in the air contributes to the formation and changing of other air pollutants as well. Particulate matter, very fine particles, and is formed from human-made sources as well as natural sources. And examples include particles emitted from the burning of fuel, such as domestic heating, power generation, and also in vehicle engines. Now, PM10, which is noted on the slide, it refers to the size of the particulate matter. So the 10 is referring to 10 microns, and that's about, with reference to human hair, is about 70 microns. So it's a lot smaller than human hair. So road transport contributes to other sources of particulate matter as well, such as brake and tyre wear, and also when vehicles travel across the road, they resuspend dust that is settled onto the road, and that also contributes to particulate matter in the air. It's quite well known that poor air quality impacts human health. Nitrogen dioxide concentrations at high concentrations can inflame the airways, and pollution from particulate matter can harm the heart and lungs. So as Councillor Barnes mentioned earlier on, road vehicles are the single biggest cause of London's air pollution, and you can see in the chart on this slide quite clearly where the congested busy roads are, with the A406 down the bottom and the A10 running vertically up the middle of the page as well. Next slide, please. So I'll spend a couple of minutes on this slide here. So across London, air quality is monitored at around 100 different locations, and these are all monitored by London boroughs. These monitoring locations are highly technical, they're very costly, and they also require regular maintenance. And they're known as automatic stations, and these record data constantly. On the left-hand side in the image here, Enfield has 4 of these stations, which are all pointed out. And each station is a little bit different. Sorry, the different icons relate to a different type of station, but there's 4 in the borough, and you can see 2 on the A406 at the bottom there with the blue car symbol. Each of these monitoring locations has real-time data available on the London Air website, which is the a link of that is on the second link on this slide. And moving to borough monitoring, Enfield submits annual reports to the Department for Environment, Food, Rural Affairs, and also the Greater London Authority. These are available on the website, on the Enfield website, which is the third link on this slide. On the image on the right-hand side, You can see in yellow, these are where we have the borough-wide monitoring locations, and these are with the devices called diffusion tubes. And these are all placed near the roadside. The diffusion tubes are used widely in the industry for indicative monitoring, and a single measurement is provided over the month for nitrogen dioxide. Now, air quality by nature is highly variable. It's a very complex process that's affected day to day, month to month by weather and atmospheric conditions. So wind, sunlight, temperature of the ground, these all affect the levels of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter in the air. So as the weather changes, so too does the air quality. Around 30 to 40% of air pollution actually comes from outside Greater London. So not only do local changes impact air quality, but so too do wider impacts. Because of these variations and the impacts of the weather, means the air quality isn't particularly simple to monitor, particularly in short periods of time. So it's necessary to review the data over a long period so that we can establish trends to see the effects of weather conditions and making considerations for variations in weather. So modelling of air quality is an industry recognised method of tracking and predicting air quality. London-wide, air pollution levels are predicted using a model that estimates how pollution will spread over time and distance. For this project, the air quality model for the Fox Lane area will do the same. The model takes a number of things into account, such as data, mathematical equations, assumptions, and then it provides predicted outcomes. So it's a computer simulation of real-life complex scenarios. Next slide, please. So the data that's taken into account for the Fox Lane model is traffic data. And as you can see here, we've got the same slide, and you can see each of the traffic data locations. So these, the data has mentioned, we've got volumes of of vehicles, types of vehicles, and also speeds, and all of these are input and used in the model. The model also takes into account other factors like junctions and buildings, because both of these impact on air quality as well. The model predicts air quality with and without the scheme in place to assess its impact. The outcomes of the model are checked against roadside measurements, and this is an essential step of all modelling. The roadside measurements for this check is data from the diffusion tubes. Next slide, please. So I'll just wrap up by repeating these useful links here. There is a fair amount of information that is published on these websites, among a number of other websites which provide further background to air quality, and particularly the Enfield, it sort of just sets out the sort of various levels of monitoring that happens at a project level, then at a borough level, and then at the city-wide level. So as all our monitoring data will be published along with our monitoring report. Next slide, please. So I'll now hand over to Dave, who will cover off the equalities approach.
And good evening. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming along this evening. My name is Dave Mccaffrey. I'm the Programme Manager for Healthy Streets. So my role involves trying to coordinate all the different projects we have, of which this is one, and try and deliver them onto the ground. So if I could have the next slide, please. So what I just want to talk to you about is the way that we look at equality. So it's actually been really encouraging for us to be challenged by the community on our equalities approach. We've gotten lots of comments, lots of feedback, lots of emails about people's view on it, and that's encouraging us to rethink how we're approaching various things at various times. So I thought I'd just show you the model that we tend to use from the outset. So earlier on we just sort of talked through, Councillor Barnes sort of painted the picture of the previous schemes that we'd had. The model that we use here starts with the phase of developing the design. Developing the design takes into account lots of different rules and standards that exist with all highway schemes that are designed. So that covers things like widths of pavements, how crossings are constructed, the height things to be at, and those in general terms are tried to be standardised in a way where they minimise any inconvenience to people in particular circumstances. We acquired data to help starting to support what our idea might be and to understand how we may need to change it. And we engage with various groups to try and understand how they might feel about what we're proposing. And that was described again by Councillor Barnes and then others subsequently earlier around running public events and also having various engagement sessions with them, direct feedback through elected members and so on. And so based on that part of the process, we then review what we're hearing from the people that we're talking to, what we're trying to achieve and what the data tells us. And then we iterate and we go backwards and we look at the design again, and then we move forward through our next cycle. So this is how each of these stages, we're continually trying to think about how different groups may be affected by what we do. But it is probably worth me just articulating that we should never make the assumption that what we have now is some way equal. And at the heart of this programme is that there are very particular groups of people who don't own a car, for argument's sake, in Enfield. And those people do not benefit from lots of measures that support driving a car. So the current position isn't necessarily, well, isn't at all an equal one. So part of what we're trying to do is correct the balance. And at the end of the equalities approach, just the final part is we complete an equality impact assessment, which is attached to the final approval report, which will go to elected members to make a decision on whether to approve the scheme permanently, either in its current form or in an amended form, as we follow the rules of the traffic order process. So we put down all of the things that we have done, all of the concerns that we might have in terms of how it might negatively impact equality, but also the positives as well. So it's about trying to understand how we can promote equality with what we're doing for certain groups of people. Can I have the next slide, please? So just in terms of where we're at now, so the updated EQIA is going up on Let's Talk today. So that isn't the first iteration, it just we've done some work to update it. We are looking very closely across the Bowes scheme and the Fox Lane scheme and trying to apply learning and comment to both of them that we're getting from the public to understand that where things are being raised, does it impact on the other schemes? So we are trying to learn in parallel, but that's there for you to review. And I really would encourage you, if you think there's something that we've missed, please fill out the engagement survey. It is still open exactly for that reason, and it just helps you let us know if you believe there's a particular impact on you for a reason of equality in particular. The Enfield Council Equalities Board, which was relatively recently founded, that consists of elected members and community representatives, and we did a presentation to them about the Healthy Streets programme and in particular our quieter neighbourhoods, to include Bowes and Fox Lane. The survey responses that we have, both not only in terms of the disability specific questionnaires that we've done, but also the primary questionnaire had a significantly high rate of disabled people actually contribute to it. So that was actually really good already. So we do have, we're doing quite a lot of analysis work to understand what people have been saying in those surveys, what the trends and patterns are in them, and how what we can draw from that data in terms of any changes or any communication that we might need to make. And what that's allowed us to do is to identify, point 4 there is the gaps in representation. So that's about us understanding where we struggle to engage with very particular groups. So for example, it is very, very difficult to get engagement from people under the age of 40 in these engagement surveys. It's very difficult to get engagement in areas of the BME community. And so we are trying to reflect on how we can get more responses from those groups of people. Disabled badge holders in particular, we did have some initial issues in just trying to get that data and use it for this purpose, but we managed to overcome that. So we've written to all the disabled badge holders that we believe live in the area and asked very specifically for them to complete some engagement for us. And that is again been very, very useful and has given us lots to look through in terms of our analysis. And that's just helped us identify what are the things that we might have to consider by way of amendment or by way of communication or education in terms of any mitigations that we have to put in place, because there are particular things affecting particular people. And the last one is that we're reviewing quite a lot of the academic studies. So this isn't just about what we as a team either just believe or think. There are a lot of academic studies being produced in terms of how we simultaneously deal with the climate problem while balancing the demands around transport projects such as this. So we are putting quite a lot of time into reviewing those types of documents, both research, academic and opinion. And Transport for All is one very particular organisation who've produced quite an interesting report in relation to low traffic neighbourhoods in particular. Cover the next slide, please. So in terms of what next, by the time we get to our final report, we want to be satisfied that we've got a good representation and spread from people with all types of protected characteristics. We want to develop the Equality Impact Assessment with more detail so that we understand precisely some of the issues that we think we need to look into more, and we've identified in the current assessment that we do need to do more to understand some of those things. And very particularly at the moment is the focus groups that we want to run. There's been quite a lot of incoming information so far, so that's given us quite a lot to look through. And so we're keen now, having identified a few key topics, to try and invite people who have responded to some of the surveys to come into the focus groups with us, so that we can talk about your views and thoughts in more detail and really perhaps get into the specific circumstances of some of the challenges that you're facing. So that's our equality. Excuse me, yes, that's our equality approach. Do apologise. I'm going to hand on to Liz now, if we could have the next slide, please. And Liz is going to talk to you about our communications and engagement plan. So thank you, everybody, and over to Liz.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name's Liz Rhodes. I'm the Healthy Streets Public Relations Manager. I work on communications and engagement across the Healthy Streets program. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit squished, but should be recognisable to you all. This is our project page for the Fox Lane Quieter Neighbourhood project. So this page is the hub of information. We've got project updates on there, FAQs, documents to download, including the project documents referenced earlier, and of course the consultation survey that is currently live. Next slide, please. So there have been a number of activities that have been delivered over the past few years in relation to this project. Richard mentioned earlier that we ran the first trial in the Fox Lane area from December 2018, and that ran through until about June the next year. So that trial was also delivered using an experimental traffic order, which meant that the first 6 months of that period were also a period of statutory consultation. So perhaps some of you are involved back then. We ran a very similar process in terms of a consultation survey and statutory process around that. That trial was then removed and we collated all the comments we received along with looking at the monitoring work that had been gathered throughout that period. And using that information, we revised a proposal and presented that publicly in November 2019. So in November, we ran an event at the old Starbucks in Palmers Green, and also an online survey which was open until I think just before Christmas, so for a number of weeks. And again, we were collecting comments and ended up not introducing that proposal. So again, we revised the proposal based on the comments received, analysed it, we presented a report and a summary of those comments, and then revise the proposal to what you see today, or what was introduced last September on the ground. So around last year, mid last year, around July, we published the traffic order. So the traffic order was published in the London Gazette and the Enfield Independent newspapers. We delivered a project flyer to all properties in the area, which included a map of the scheme and some background information. We sent out a construction notification letter as well as a notification letter about the upcoming consultation prior to that going live in October. And of course, we've got the Let's Talk project page, which, as I said, hosts a number of updates and has done so over the past few months. And we conducted our statutory consultation with emergency services during that time as well. Next slide, please. So the consultation survey that's been mentioned a few times tonight, that's been open since October last year. It's going to be closing on the 11th of July. So there's still a bit of time to complete that if you haven't done so already. So this survey is hosted on the Let's Talk site. We've also been receiving a number of emails and letters that are going to be included as part of the consultation. So thanks to everyone who's already submitted their comments through that process. In addition to that main consultation survey, we've also run some more a more tailored survey. So this was the Disabled People and Carers survey that was run during March of this year. So the idea of this survey was really to better understand the impact of the trial on this group of people. And as Dave's just mentioned, we're also going to be looking at those issues with some of those people who took part in that survey in some upcoming focus groups. So they'll be happening next month. We have engaged with the emergency services, as I mentioned, that's ongoing. So we are in regular communication with them. And like I've said a few times, we also post project updates on the Let's Talk project page. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, we're working with an external agency to review and analyse and report on the consultation responses. So they have started that process. We are reviewing them as they're submitted, like it says on the screen. But in terms of the analysis, we really do require the full report, which will summarise all comments received and respond to the issues that have been raised throughout this process. So that report will be published. It will be published on the Let's Talk sites and will inform the project's next steps. Next slide, please. Great, so I'm just going to hand back to Richard, who's going to cover off on next steps.
Thanks, Liz. Next slide. Just one slide here and then we'll get into questions. Yes, we just wanted to set out where we go from here. So what will be happening next in June, we're going to collect some further traffic data from the surrounding roads. So as we've seen the sort of lockdown restrictions ease, you know, we hope we think we'll start to be able to get some more sort of valid data as things return to whatever the new normal might be. So in June, you'll see some traffic data. You may see some traffic data collection going on just on the surrounding roads at that time. Liz has just mentioned about the consultation closing on the 11th of July, and I will just explain. So there are some sort of legal requirements around the traffic order, and I think people have been of the view that if you didn't get your particularly those people who perhaps objecting to the scheme, if they didn't get their views in, you know, by a date last week, I think, and it didn't have the right reference number and the right quote, then it wouldn't be counted. And I can just assure you that while ever that consultation is open and we're collecting comments, then any feedback they will receive, be it an objection or otherwise, you know, will be considered, and everything will be considered. And it doesn't matter whether it's got a particular reference number on or not. We will work through all that data and we will consider those issues and we'll report on those issues. So I hope that explains that. And I think going forward we can provide a bit more clarity about the different ways of people making their representations. So 11th of July that will close. In July we'll collect further traffic data on all the roads, so roads within the area and the surrounding area, and again we'll be able to consider that against the context of the pandemic and of COVID and the lockdown restrictions. That July data, just to be clear, will be collected prior to the school holidays. And then we'll go into summer, and we'll be doing the analysis with a decision to follow. So that's the sort of outline of the next steps. But we will need to keep reviewing the COVID context and respond accordingly. Next slide, please. So that takes us to the Q&A. So we're going to kick off with the Q&A. I'm going to hand over to Liz in a second. Before we do, if we could just go to the next slide, because a common question that we've had is around the camera enforced closures. It seems that there are sort of a few misconceptions around this, and this is probably a good opportunity to clarify those. So the council have not installed camera closure points because it wants to. It's installed them because when it's been discussing the projects with the emergency services in the early design phase before any implementation, we came to some consensus around what were the key routes that emergency services wanted to pass through unhindered. So we've established that in the design process, and therefore in order to make the scheme work, we've had to come forward and use camera enforced closures at that point, so the emergency services obviously can continue to pass through. What we can do as a council is we can in the traffic order we can dispensate the emergency services and enable them to continue to pass through the closure point, where we sign it as a no motor vehicle entry point, which is what this sign here is. And it's, this is some call this the flying motorbike. Some people have not necessarily understood this sign, but this sign is a red circle. It's a do not do something, and this is no motor vehicles past this point. Some have asked, why don't we use a no entry sign? Because that's more recognizable, and I appreciate that. But the traffic order does not allow us to give emergency services the permission to pass through a no entry point. So if we signed these closure points with no entry points, it wouldn't fulfill. And the emergency service told us you can't do that. You could do it, but you can't do it if you want it to carry out its intended purpose of allowing us to continue to pass through. So from a scheme's point of view, it would be simpler if all these were permanent closures, but we recognise that for emergency services, we've got to keep the network open to a certain extent, and that's why we've used these. Happy to come back to that later. Liz, can I pass to you, and we'll go through Q&A.
Great, thanks, Richard. So I'm going to start off, we've got a number of questions that are coming through, so thanks everyone for posting those. I'm going to try to get through as many as possible. We've got about half an hour, but like we've said earlier, they will be posted and we'll try to respond to them following the webinar tonight. So please continue to use the Q&A function to ask questions. It makes it easier for me if you do post one question at a time, please. Yeah, we'll be reviewing the FAQs and posting them tonight, along with comments received, which are not being published in the channel tonight. Thank you. Next slide. Cool. So Councillor Barnes, I might throw this one to you first of all. We've got a number of questions coming in about the main roads surrounding the Fox Lane area and the impact on them in terms of congestion, noise and air quality. So do you have any comments on that and in terms of what actions we're taking to help these surrounding roads?
Okay, thanks, Liz. So, yeah, I am aware there has been some congestion on the surrounding roads. I mean, it's mainly at rush hour, as far as I can see, because I do cycle around the area. I cycle around the Fox Lane LTN. I cycle around Bowes LTN quite regularly as well. So, you know, we do recognise there is some congestion on there, but as I said in my opening statement, you know, the congestion on there highlights just how much, you know, through traffic is invading our minor residential neighbourhoods. So consequently, you know, because we've stopped those rat running routes across Fox Lane, the traffic which was displaced into Fox Lane has now been placed back onto the main road. So listen, we don't want to forget about those 10% of residents on main roads. So I've said that, you know, we're trying to lobby for changes, infrastructure changes, such as the Southgate roundabout, which, you know, I've made quite clear that I don't think is fit for purpose anymore. It was never designed for this amount of traffic on our roads, and I'd love to see some cycle lanes and such like in a redesign of that. So that's something that we would like to tackle. Green buffers, so more trees for perimeter roads. That is something we've doubled the tree budget this year after some negotiations. So I'm hoping that should the trial become permanent, and that's by no means a given, then we can really green up those perimeter roads to provide barriers. There is the option of cycle lanes as well, none planned at the moment, but cycle lanes push traffic and noise further away from residential properties. But I mean, I think the most important thing for these perimeter roads and all main roads and A roads, including the North Circular, which the North Circular has 295,000 vehicles a day passing Bowes, which is just a staggering amount of vehicles. So the most important thing is road user charging, in my opinion. And there's three competing elements going on at the moment. The Chancellor has asked for a report from the Treasury about it. The reason he's asked for a report is because there's going to be a £30 billion black hole, because electric vehicles are going to reduce fuel duty and reduce vehicle excise duty because they are zero emitters. There's also a select committee. The Transport Select Committee is looking at road user charging, and the new mayor, or the re-elected mayor, Sadiq Khan, has said that he's also looking at road user charging. So I strongly believe that it's imminent, really, because of that fiscal black hole that's going to occur. And that road user charging means that vehicles will be charged to use the roads. I mean, there's a theory that perhaps they will be drivers will be given X thousand free miles a year, and when they go over those miles, that's when they'll start getting charged. And this, I think, will be hugely beneficial to the climate, hugely beneficial to these main roads, these A roads that are getting flooded with traffic. And that's the answer going forwards. The answer going forwards is not to open up our residential neighbourhoods as release valves for these congested main roads. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Councillor. Richard, we've got a couple of questions that have come up about an alternative option of using one-way streets to create a quieter neighbourhood in the area. Would or could this work, and would it be considered?
Thanks, Liz. So I think there are certain places in the borough where we look at one-way schemes. I mean, I think in a place such as the Fox Lane quieter neighbourhood, what we'd potentially do, what we certainly wouldn't do is reduce traffic that's cutting through residential areas to get from A to B. And what you can have the potential impact of actually speeding up that traffic. One-way streets which don't have a sort of a contraflow and therefore nothing coming towards you, have been shown to potentially increase the speeds on residential roads. And I suspect could end up with some type of tidal scenario where there's lots of traffic cutting through one way at one time of day and then back in the other direction. So what we're trying to do with this scheme is reduce the overall volume of traffic, not just reduce the speed, and therefore we think this more comprehensive approach is more appropriate to try at this time. I think some people have also asked about, well, why not just do a 20, and this scheme does include a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit as well within the area. Thanks, Liz.
Great, thanks, Richard. Another one for you is, what factors will determine the success of the trial?
Well, I think Liz has, sorry, forgive me, Christina's gone through the monitoring plan. We've outlined all the different factors that will be considered, and when we pull together the reporting, we need to understand, well, what is that impact on the surrounding roads? Are we seeing any signs that there can be more cycling and walking within the quieter neighbourhood area? What is the impact on air quality? What's the impact on noise? Are bus journeys still flowing? Understanding that data will help us pull together a picture of in the round whether we think that the scheme has been a success or not, or is a workable scheme. So there are not, I know some people are ready, want a particular metric about it has to hit this level before it's deemed to be a success, and because there's so many different factors at play, we don't feel that that's the right approach. We need to get all the data, pull it together in a comprehensive report, and then present that to elected members to be able to make a decision on what they think for the future of the trial.
Councillor Barnes, do you want to add anything to that about the success of the trial? Measuring the success of the trial, that is.
I think just to say, I think Richard's summed that up quite succinctly. I mean, I'm very keen to see data such as what car users think, obviously, with regards to and also versus non-car users, who the non-car users who are walking our streets and suffering the pollution. So it's data like that that's really important, and that's the data we'll be looking at to see eventually, what benefits that the scheme will bring, or the scheme may have brought, and then that will be that kind of data will be run by my cabinet colleagues before a decision is made.
I think Liz, sorry, if I can just add, as part of that assessment, we'll be able to determine better what are the impacts on the surrounding roads. So you may conclude that yes, it works for within the area clearly, but what are those impacts, and are there other things that if you were to make this a scheme like this permanent, what are the other things, and we've touched on some of those, that you could do to help mitigate those impacts. But we need to collect the data in order to take that view, and that data collection thing itself has been significantly challenged as a result of the pandemic.
Great, thank you both. Dave, this question might be for you. So we've got a question about how do you cater for the less able-bodied people and disabled people who may not be able to walk and cycle those short journeys that we refer to?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So a really good question, and one we get that comes up very often. So part of the design ideas around the low traffic neighbourhoods are we do create opportunities for people to cross the road with more time. Common thing that having been in a wheelchair myself for a bit, the idea that when you go along the pavements, you think as an able-bodied person that the pavement's nice and wide and you can just move around the wheelie bins and the tree roots that are popping up a little bit, and it's a lot harder. And in the LTN, there is an ability there with the significantly reduced volumes to allow people to use the road space for things like for getting about. So in that sense, sometimes there is a lot of benefit granted. However, there are people who have very complex needs, very complex difficulties. And when I say that the current situation is not equal, that's exactly the group that I'm talking about, because those people have to go sometimes to increased numbers of medical appointments, to pharmacy appointments, physiotherapy appointments, specialist medical support appointments. And in order to get to those places, they are having to fight all of this additional traffic that is clogging up the network. So already they are inhibited. So it isn't just about targeting that very short journey for everybody. I think it's important to reiterate Richard's point. This isn't about stopping every car journey all of the time. It is about allowing people to make choices to take an alternative mode that is suitable and fit for them to use. And for some people, that may continue to be the car for those journeys, and that they may be described just there. So I think I've probably answered that, but happy to take any other points on that.
Great, thanks. One now for either Christina or Richard. Why are you counting traffic, not queue delays and lengths of queues?
I can cover that off initially. I'll just wait for the camera. Yeah, so the bus journey times that I talked about earlier, that definitely does take into account queuing time, because it's looking at the amount of the length of time it takes for a bus to move from one stop to another on those typically congested roads. So that is something that is definitely taken into account. With respect to air quality, the way that is taken into account is via the speed, and so we've got those traffic counts, which are at a specific location on the road. But inside the model, the road is sort of broken down into different speed profiles, and so it does take into account the various congestion and slower moving traffic at, say, junctions and other places. So we do take into account volumes, but the queue lengths and those journey times is also part of our monitoring.
Great, thank you. Councillor Barnes, what are you doing to support more electric vehicle charging points, subsidies for electric vehicles and infrastructure for electric vehicles?
Okay, thanks, Liz. Electric vehicles comes up a lot. I see a lot of stuff on social media, a lot of comments on social media, somehow imagining that electric vehicles are the answer to, you know, all of our pollution issues, and they're certainly not. They're not a panacea. Firstly, they're not going to help with regards to congestion on our roads. We're just going to swap fossil fuel vehicles for electric vehicles, so same amount of vehicles on our roads, same amount of congestion, increased numbers of cars in the future, which is why we're trying to encourage people out of those cars for those short journeys. I think it's also really important to note that with electric cars, 50% of the emissions from those cars are not from the tailpipe. They're from the brake pads, they're from the tyres, and these are the kinds of particulates, the very small particulates that were mentioned earlier in the presentation. So, you know, even if we do a wholesale switch to electric cars, we've still got those 50% of emissions going on across our borough that we're all inhaling practically all the time. So, you know, that goes back to our objective that we would like to encourage people out of cars altogether, if they're able-bodied, if they're able to do that, and onto foot and onto cycle. I think it's also just connected to that. You know, that there are ethical concerns about the batteries in electric cars. You know, the birth of the batteries and the end of the life of the batteries, and the lithium and the mines. So there's those kind of ethical considerations as well. And I just think it's very sad at the moment that, you know, SUVs are outselling electric vehicles by 2 to 1. And when I say SUVs, I'm talking about the enormous cars that we're seeing increasingly on our streets. You know, it's gone from 7% 10 years ago to I think 25% now, which with SUVs, which are just, you know, some are enormous. You see pictures of children next to them, and you know it's incredibly dangerous with regards to blind spots and such like. So, you know, it would be great to see the SUV sales slowing and electric vehicle sales picking up, because I do recognise it is a step change. Us as a borough, what we're doing what we've decided to do under the Climate Change Task Force is lamppost charging. So we have a trial at the moment. I think there's about 60 lampposts that we are putting chargers into, so that you'll be able to plug your car into a lamppost with a charging mechanism sort of in line with the cable. We think this is going to be the most efficient way that we can provide charging to the borough. So at the moment it's concentrated around the ULEZ zone, and I'm hoping that trial goes really well, and then we can look to expanding across the whole borough so that lamppost charging will be an option.
Great, thanks, Councillor. Christina, we've got a question on air quality monitoring. So why are you relying on modelling rather than measuring for monitoring of air quality?
Sure. So because of the sort of complexities of air quality, it's not possible to sort of these diffusion tubes. If we take the 1 month data that we get from it, so we get an average reading from a diffusion tube for a whole month, And then if we looked at it at the next month, we can't see the impacts of the project or the difference in traffic because of those the weather and the longer term variations. So it's important to look across a long period of time, and through the model that's able to look at a lot of the sort of complex behaviours of how air pollutants in the air sort of disperse over time and in place. And so we can't get that just from monitoring alone. And as I mentioned earlier, so even London-wide, air quality is monitored at various stations, but that all goes into a model to look at London-wide. It's exactly the same across the project as well.
Great, thank you. Councillor Barnes, I might throw this one to you again, if that's okay. So how does the council respond to claims that the scheme has widened socioeconomic inequalities by pushing traffic and pollution from highly affluent streets surrounding Fox Lane to the perhaps less affluent flats of Green Lanes?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I've seen a lot about that, but there was a report from Rachel Aldred, LTNs for All, which said that, you know, this is certainly not the case, and we have to start reducing the air quality somehow. We have to start improving air quality somehow, and the way to do this is to start introducing LTNs. As I've said as well, you know, we're not purposely trying to congest these main roads because we recognise that people live there. But I'm going to refer back to my previous answer, which was the fact that, you know, we need road user charging. Otherwise, our main roads will continue to suffer. And even if the LTNs were all taken away, traffic is going to increase over the next decade. We know that. So this feels like the best way forward at this present moment in time.
Thanks, Councillor. I've got another one for you. So the cameras have made quite a lot of money through fines in the area. What is the council doing with this money?
So I know that the fines from the cameras is a hot topic. Everybody, I saw a table in the Times newspaper, I think it was, or a newspaper, about the amount of fines across London from the cameras. Firstly, let's just re-emphasise. I think Richard mentioned it. You know, these cameras were put in for the emergency services. You know, so that there's a clear run. The emergency services can go through these strategic points, and they are unhindered. So you know, that is why we have the cameras in there. You know, it's not some sort of money-making tool. You know, I would prefer a bollard and planters myself, but you know, these have been agreed for the emergency services. And Conway was a camera that we put in specifically because of concerns of residents within the Fox Lane area that, you know, they were worried about the emergency services. So we put another camera into that Fox Lane LTN, as well as Fox Lane camera and the Meadway camera. The fines that we've made so far, I think it's around about 2 million, maybe just over 2 million. They are going towards our £11 million charge for the Freedom Pass, and you know, the Freedom Pass is wonderful for the elderly and the disabled across the borough. So you know, that's where the money is going. I did have a conversation this week, though. I'm trying to see if I can take a portion of that money to invest in new school streets. We have 14 school streets which are absolutely wonderful and have had some brilliant success. What I'd love to do is get another 10 school streets up and running if I can, but we need the finances for that. So, you know, I'm trying to see whether we can use some of that camera, the PCN money, to fund, you know, 10 more school streets.
Thanks, Councillor. We've got a couple of questions about accessing bikes for people who are wanting to cycle. So it seemed to be quite difficult to buy a bike at the moment, Richard, and there's a question around how we could help, how the council is helping people access bikes.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Yeah, there's there's a few things that we're looking at doing, and again, you know, the sort of lockdown position has not helped us with this, but we are reintroducing our doctor bike service. So for those people who've got bicycles perhaps already that have need a bit of TLC, then they can take it along to the sort of local doctor bike. Palmer's Green Library, we've traditionally had one, and that's a free service. We've hosted them before, but we've got plans for some more second-hand bike markets. So I think we're planning on. I think we've had one before at the Greenfield Park at the festival. I think we're certainly looking at that location for a future one, which provides an opportunity for people to access affordable bicycles. And there are other sort of initiatives as well that we're doing, including cycle training. So again, that's been sort of suppressed through to maintain social distancing, but hopefully that can start to come back online, where people may simply have not cycled ever before. Lots of people in London have never cycled, so qualified cycling instructors can teach them from scratch, or equally it just might have been a good number of years and you just want a bit more confidence getting back on the bike, or also you might be fairly confident on the bike but you want to start to ride a particular route, and doing that with a qualified cycling instructor for the first few times and helping understand how you might negotiate a particular junction can be a helpful thing to do. Cycle parking is another area, and there are some cycle hangars installed, and some more gone in relatively recently through the area, and we sort of welcome more requests and hoping for some more funding to be able to expand that project as well.
Great, thank you. We've got a question about how the opinions of residents will be taken into account in making decisions on the future of the Quieter Neighbourhood and the trial. So I'll start that, and if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. We are, like I said, we're working with an external agency who are experienced in consultation analysis on very similar projects. So they work in the traffic and transportation field. So they're conducting quite a rigorous analysis for us, and we've been working closely with them on both this project as well as the Bowes Primary Quieter Neighbourhood project. So they're going to be producing a report to us that summarises what people are saying. As you can imagine, there's a lot of data coming into us. We've got consultation responses via email, survey, letter, and so it is quite a big job. But we're working closely also with Councillor Barnes, who's been cited on some of that work already. And like I said, that report will be published on the Let's Talk site when we have it. Richard, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll jump in if I may, just before Richard jumps in.
Sure.
Sorry, Richard. I just want to say, what I'm very keen to see in the data is if there's one tweak that could please a great many people. So we're looking for those certain comments that connect up with other comments, and if there's something we can do about that would achieve that would satisfy a large amount of those comments. That's something that I'm particularly keen on focusing on when we get that independent report. Sorry, Richard.
No, I've nothing further to add.
Cool, thank you. We've got a question about Greenfield Park. So Richard, perhaps you could help answer this one. So Greenfield Park, a prime green space in the area. It's right next to three roads that have taken displaced traffic as a result of the Quieter Neighbourhood. It's used by a lot of people, including children, young people, families. What air quality impact assessment has been made on this amenity?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So yeah, I mean, I recognise the park is a fantastic asset for the local community, and I know well used and well loved. So we do, as part of the monitoring plan, I think we've got locations pretty much surrounding the park. So until we've done that analysis as Christina's set out, then we won't have those results. But that's certainly something that that we'll need to consider as part of the monitoring. But I can't until that's concluded. I can't say much more.
Great, thank you. Councillor Barnes, couple of things coming in about the process of the trial and the trial itself being anti-democratic. So do you have any comments on that?
I've had quite a few emails that level this accusation. I mean, there's a few things that I would say. The first thing is, it was in our manifesto. I mean, there's been some contention from an ex-cabinet member who has now left the party that it wasn't. But that cabinet member himself was looking at modal filters, which are the components of LTN. So that was the direction that it was moving in. I think when he left office. Secondly, the opposition. In Enfield, the Conservative opposition introduced a debate on low traffic neighbourhoods at full council. Now, full council is the highest decision-making body within local government at Enfield Council. That debate took place. It was a robust debate. There was a vote at the end of it, a democratic vote, and that vote was to continue with our LTN trials. It is slightly puzzling that the Conservative opposition is against LTNs when it's in their government's manifesto and also within the 10-point plan for a green revolution. But I'll let them answer the reason why they oppose their own government's policies. And also, I think it's worth mentioning Sadiq Khan was voted in, re-elected as London Mayor, supports LTNs. Really positive that Sadiq Khan is back as mayor, because the environment will take precedent within London, and I think it was also interesting to see that the people, some of the candidates that were anti-LTN did very, very poorly, and even Sean Bailey changed his message on LTNs halfway through his campaign. So there's two consultations, one for Fox Lane, one for Bowes. I think that is the most democratic, solution to the LTNs, where anybody and everybody can have their say. So that would be my answer with regards to the democracy surrounding LTNs, Liz.
Great, thanks, Councillor. I think we've got time for maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up. So there's a question, Richard, about would you consider, or is it possible to extend the trial to account for the impact of COVID-19 and people returning to offices?
Okay, so the trial has been put in on an experimental traffic order. So what that means is that you've typically got between 6 and 18 months in order to make an assessment of that trial. And sometimes you can make that assessment fairly early on and you don't need it that whole time, and other times you do need more time, and this is a classic example of that. So we wouldn't envisage extending the trial beyond the current experimental traffic order period. That's not something that we can do. So we need to make a decision within that period. But this is one of those cases where we need more time, not less, in order to allow traffic to start to return following lockdown restrictions.
Great, thank you. And final question for tonight, I think, is, are there any plans to introduce or encourage more car clubs so that fewer people need to own a car? Councillor Barnes?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. This is on the Climate Change Task Force agenda. Dominic Millen is the officer for that. We are both very keen to attract more car clubs to the borough, and that is ongoing, and I hope that we'll see more success with that in the near future. At the moment, electric charging has sort of dominated the agenda, as well as some other wonderful stuff that we're doing in the Climate Change Task Force. But I think car clubs are brilliant, and it's something that we have to really concentrate on bringing into the borough and proliferating across the borough.
Okay, I think Liz, we're probably sort of running out of time. Thank you for that. I appreciate that we haven't got to all the questions. As I said, we will do an FAQ document on those and get those published. Thank you very much for everyone's comments. I will stress the consultation remains open, and that's whether you're in the area, on the surrounding roads, so please do continue to participate in that, and you can do so more than once if you wish. Thank you to my colleagues for the time and for the presentations. I'll just pass over to Councillor Barnes just to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you to yourself and your team for taking part tonight, and thank you for everybody who's watched tonight. I mean, we've had up to 200 attendees at one point, I think we had in the meeting. As has been emphasised tonight, we've extended to the 11th of July to allow for a decent amount of time after this webinar for your feedback. And I just want to emphasise, no decision has been made at this time on the future of the trial. We are listening. We made changes originally to the Fox Lane design, quite significant changes, and we made a change to Conway with regards to putting the camera in. So we'll analyse all of the feedback very carefully. And just to say, just before I wrap up, there are a lot of scare stories out there on social media, so please do take everything you see or hear with a pinch of salt. There's a lot of interesting stuff on our project page, so investigate there if you do get the chance. Take care. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your evening.